This is Duke University.
I'd like to introduce the second speaker for the afternoon, Will Patrick. Will is a rapid evaluator with Google X. He also happens to be a Chapel Hill native and a Duke grad, so came from humble roots here in North Carolina as well. We're really pleased to have Will here. Will was on the panel on sustainable technologies for the developing world as well, so we've worked him hard while he is here. But Will would like to talk about the work that they do at Google X and around this concept of moonshot thinking. You know, I think we live in a world that's been really shaped by the quality movement's focus on continuous improvement, finding 1%, 2%, 3% improvements continuously. And obviously, there's a place for that. That's what has driven productivity improvements and lots of good things in the world. But around the challenges that we face now, we need something different. We need something more than incremental thinking. We need something that can be disruptive, something that can be catalytic, something that can not have a 1 or 2% improvement, but a 10x improvement on the existing solution. And so the work that Will does at Google X is really trying to develop a methodology and a process for identifying and then helping to nurture those kind of opportunities that are on the 10x kind of order of magnitude. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Will to share his experience at Google X. Great to have you here, Will. Thank you.
The actual moonshot is wonderful, inspirational, poetic, beautiful, involved great technical challenges, genuine heroism. It brought the world together. But think about the Polynesian islander on the dugout canoe, deciding one day they were going to go that way. No one had ever been that way before. No one even knew if there was anything that way before. It was amazing, and it changed the world.
People can set their minds to magical, seemingly impossible ideas, and then through science and technology, bring them to reality. And that then sets other people on fire, that other things that look impossible might be accomplishable.
Galileo is such a hero, in thinking big, and what he represents to me is both curiosity and wonder that humanity had, that he had, that pushed him and drove himself to invent and work on the first telescopes that allowed us to see the moon, and here we are.
These aviation pioneers were figuring it out as they went. No one really knew how to build an airplane, right? No one knew how to fly an airplane. It was amazing and crazy and wonderful, and they wanted to explore.
Many years ago, the great British explorer George Mallory, who was to die on Mount Everest, was asked why did he want to climb it. He said, because it is there.
There's so many challenges in the world, and you can feel daunted by that, and sort of oppressed by that, or you kind of say, how might we think differently about this?
Everyone else in the world is working on the next 10%. If you can be the one that delivers that 10 times improvement, you have a chance to really change things.
If you want cars to run at 50 miles per gallon, fine, you can retool your car a little bit. But if I tell you it has to run on a gallon of gas for 500 miles, you have to start over.
You need a lot of courage in this work, and you need a lot of persistence. One of the things that's really critical is not only having the courage to keep trying every day or thinking big, even if you don't really 100% believe it's possible, like you might think this might be possible, have the courage to try. That's how the greatest things have happened.
You don't spend your time being bothered that you can't teleport from here to Japan, because there's a part of you that thinks it's impossible. Moonshot thinking is choosing to be bothered by that.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Humanity's progress has been a series of amazing, audacious things, from the very small and personal up to the great, big, and grand. And we are a species of moonshots. And to me, that's like the really amazing, poetic, and inspirational thing.
I think our ambitions are a glass ceiling on what we can accomplish.
When you find your passion, you're unstoppable. You can make amazing things happen. It's been true through all of history.
I believe in the human spirit, and I believe that there are always going to be crazy people who will get out of bed one morning and say, you know what? I think I can build a space elevator, and let's go and do it. But I think that if we become afraid to take these great big risks, we stop inspiring people. We stop achieving things. And the biggest nightmare scenario is that we won't have what it takes to solve the really big challenges.
When Kennedy said that we would put a man on the moon, it's about the fact that he said, we don't know how to do this yet, and we're gonna do it anyway. And that sends chills up everybody's spine. Because if that happens, what couldn't we do?
It's wonderful to be here. I always forget how inspiring it is to be in a group like this. I'm a rapid evaluator at Google X, which means I spend most of my days sort of inventing things, engineering, sort of way in the weeds of developing new technology. And it's so nice for me to be back here at Duke, and it's so nice for me to hear and talk to all of you all who are working on such important problems. So I just wanted to say that first, and thanks so much for having me. So one thing I think about a lot is war. And why is it that there's so much innovation and technology development that happens during wartime? And I'm not talking about the battleships, I'm not talking about faster bullets. I'm actually talking about these instances where groups of people come together and invent things because they had to at that moment. And probably my favorite one is Bletchley Park, where the smartest mathematicians in Britain came together in a period of 3 or 4 years, led by Alan Turing, to crack the German Enigma. This is the Colossus computer. It's the first programmable computer in the world. And it was invented in order so they could win the war. Of course, that's not the only time a great group has come together. The most famous, of course, is the Manhattan Project. It started when a few scientists, including Albert Einstein, wrote a letter to Dwight Eisenhower saying, we think we might have figured out how to make the biggest bomb that's ever been considered before. And they did it. And that was in 1939, and 6 years later, Groves and Oppenheimer were checking out the first bomb at the Trinity site. And of course, the famous moonshot during the Soviet Union. But I have to wonder, why do we see this type of rapid technology development? It only happens during wartime. I mean, I'm someone who really cares about things like water and energy and health. Why can't we get people focused, really, really smart, like geniuses, really intelligent people to be focusing on these really important problems? So my goal in life is to try and help figure that out, is to try and eventually be in a place where I'm organizing people to take moonshots, take these radical technology approaches to solve some of the biggest problems. And I definitely haven't accomplished that yet. But I feel very fortunate to met this guy. You just heard from him a little bit. His name's Astro, believe it or not. Astro's interesting. He runs my team. He runs Google X. But he has a sort of a unique perspective. Astro's last name is Teller. His grandfather was Edward Teller, who invented the hydrogen bomb, was one of the main people at the Manhattan Project. So Astro's sort of been, for his entire life, trying to figure out how he can do that's sort of the same goal in my mind, how to organize people to solve problems that radically improve the world. So I was very fortunate about a year and a half ago, sort of stumbled upon this group at Google. At the time, it was only about 30 or 40 people in sort of some random buildings. And I knew they were up to some interesting stuff, and I met Astro, and he sort of introduced me to the fold. And really the first thing I knew about Google X was actually from the New York Times, which had we had a leak, as we normally do at Google, and where it was called the Lab of Wildest Dreams, a top secret lab in an undisclosed Bay Area location where robots run free and the future is being imagined. I was like, yes, I found my home. And the way Asher described, well, the other thing that was known about Google X, everyone thought we were working on space elevators. So I was like, yes, really excited about working on space elevators, something that everyone had always been talking about. No comment about our space elevator projects. But really the way that Asher described Google X is it's sort of like Charlie's Chocolate Factory or Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory. We work on stuff on the inside, and eventually they come out into the world, and we'll tell you when they're ready. But the main thing that about Google X is that we are trying to work on what we call these technology moonshots. And what that means to us is it has to be something that affects 1 billion people. It has to be another Google. It has to be another Facebook, something that's going to radically change the world. And we are we are specifically looking at technology moonshots. There's other moonshots, like Gandhi's Salt March is a moonshot. It doesn't involve technology, but that type of movement also radically improved the world. So this is what my desk looks like. So it's my specific role in the team. I'm a rapid evaluator. It's our sort of small team. Rich, who is speaking, is also, we're on the same team together. Our job is to sort of figure out what to build. It's to figure out what are the projects that we should be doing. So it's mostly doing stuff like this. This was a fuel cell that we were putting together to test different things. And so the way the process roughly works is we have lots of different ideas. You try and winnow maybe 100 ideas that are just really crazy. And then you're like, well, 10 of those are actually physically possible. Let's actually prototype those. And maybe one of those 100 that you may have started with, you may decide to build a team around. So the one project that is there's 2 projects that are well known that our group has done. The first one is the self-driving car project. And that project started actually in the mid-2000s. It started from actually another government thing, DARPA. DARPA had the DARPA Grand Challenge for a self-driving vehicle. So this created all these different teams at different universities. There was a team at Stanford and Carnegie Mellon, Berkeley. There was actually a Duke team that was working with the Carnegie Mellon team to try and create a vehicle that you could, the basic challenge was you'd had to go in the desert. Right before the challenge, they would give you a route that you'd have to follow. Of course, there's no driver in the car, and you had to make it back. And it took, I think, the second or third competition before our car came back. And I don't know what happened to the other cars. But this was the first one that came back. This is Stanley. It was a Stanford car, and it was led by this guy in the top right named Sebastian. Sebastian's one of the world's leading experts in robotics. Chris Urmson led a team from Carnegie Mellon. They were the second best team. Okay, so this is right around 2007, 2008. Larry Page in the bottom right-hand corner, one of the founders at Google, was really interested in self-driving vehicles. He actually went out to a lot of those challenges and was like, why don't we bring together all these really smart academics, they're working at Stanford and Carnegie Mellon. Let's just bring them to Google. We'll give them the sort of magical Google sauce, and just let them be and see if they can make a self-driving car. And I'm, fortunately he was the founder and not the CEO at the time, so he had a lot of power. But I imagine that would be, it was audacious of him to say maybe we could actually make a self-driving car. So that's what happened. And so here's how, so they worked on it for several years. This is Chris. The car's traveled over 200,000 miles. It's been all over California and lots of other parts of the United States. This is in Palo Alto. So the way it works is there's this little sensor on top, and basically and it can stop, no one's driving. And it's basically looking at the environment around, and it's seeing, okay, there's a person who's crossing the street, and you can see the person, and it slows down, and then it goes. And so it's saying, okay, here's the environment. It's like the eyes, and then it's matching that against what it expects to see there in order to make decisions. And so what is this good for? Well, we were testing the car. We've been testing it for a few years now. And this is actually with a blind man. And so it's sort of being able to clearly, one of the big benefits of the system is being able to broaden access to transportation. And so it was really cool for our team to be able to work with Steve in order to see what he would do with the car. He ended up going to Taco Bell and getting his stuff at the post office. But I mean, he couldn't do that before, so that's really cool. But I think this little 3-circle diagram, this is what we mean by a moonshot. And I think the self-driving car project is a really good example of a moonshot. So it's a huge problem. So some of the problem is access to transportation, but 99% of deaths from car accidents come from human error. It's the leading cause of death of young people. That's not to mention all the economic loss from sitting in a car for over an hour a day. That's the average for a commuter in the United States. So it's a huge, huge problem. Why can't we give more power to the machine who's not going to make a mistake? The radical solution is, let's make a self-driving car. But what's very important is, okay, everyone can come up with a sort of silly, crazy idea like a self-driving car. But the breakthrough technology piece is the part that we really try and focus on in Google X. We try and say, okay, maybe that science fiction-like sounding idea is not so crazy after all. If you really break it down, we need to figure out these 3 components. And so in the case of a self-driving car, you have to be able to sense the environment. You need to be able to create a really good map. And then you need to actuate your tires and your gearing and all of that stuff based on those things. And Google is actually, it's really good at mapping, as most people know. And we're also really good at software. And so this is actually mostly a software problem. So it sounds crazy that Google is making a self-driving car, but this plays directly to our strengths as a company. So the other project that we've been working on, that I worked on last year, is Glass. And so what Glass is about is it's about 2 things. One is it's about getting quick access to information, but it's also about sharing a unique perspective that you couldn't share before. So we've been testing the device now internally. Like I have a device back home in San Francisco. And the one thing that's been really fun for us has been capturing moments like this that you just couldn't capture before, where you are in the moment and you want to capture your experience. Like this is one of our team members with their newborn, or just having a drink with a friend. It's cool that you can never do this before. This is me jumping into a ball pit. Okay, so we were testing the device. This is about last May, and we had been testing it and trying to, actually understand what is this going to be good for. It's totally this is a prototype, right? And we're just trying to figure out, what are people going to use this device for. But Sergey, his co-founder, he directly runs Google X. He is really pushing us. He's like, we got to go fast. We got to go fast. He said at our developer conference in June, we need to do a launch. We need to get developers on board to start programming applications for the device. And we're like, okay, so I somehow get pulled into this, even though I'm doing engineering stuff, I get pulled into this process, and I'm working with the head of the product for Glass, Steve. And Steve and I are in a meeting. We're like, all right, what are we going to do? We got to do something cool. I don't know. And then, as he's prone to do, Sergey barges through the door and is like, guys, I got it. We just need skydivers. And they'll wear glass. They'll do a hangout. It'll be awesome. And then he leaves. And Steve looks at me and he's like, was he kidding? And I was like, I don't know, man. And he was not kidding. And so this is what followed.
Any chance we can get a little view out the window?
Heck yeah. That's beautiful up here. We got a visual on my story a minute ago.
All right, this is a hangout from Glass.
So we did this is all live. This is over in San Francisco.
We got him wearing
So we couldn't just do skydiving.
And there's a little package. Let's see if we can get it here in a hurry. All right, here we go. First person view of Glass. Here are the bikers. Yeah.
And finally, we did make it to stage. I was in the front row, sort of coordinating, and was so happy for this moment. You have no idea. No one died. So was Sergey. Anyway, so I tell that story. I mean, it was just really cool. But what's important about, I think one thing that's important to remember with moonshots or coming up with sort of breakthrough technology is it's not, obviously not just about the technology. It's not just about engineering something smaller and faster and lighter weight. It's not just making it look beautiful and doing great design work. You also have to tell a story. And I think that it was really great that Sergey pushed us to take a moonshot for the storytelling element. So that brings me to 2 points. So you may be thinking, okay, most of the folks I'm guessing in the audience are in business school. So I'm not an engineer. I'm not going to be able to come up with a new science. But how can I help? Or how can I contribute? Or maybe this is just not for me. I don't know what you're thinking. But there are two incredibly important elements that are needed for moonshots. One is epic storytelling, which I think that was just a really great dramatic example of. And the other one is problem finding. And I think this one is particularly important, problem finding. This came up actually in the panel discussion today with reference to water. Water, generally speaking, is an issue that people understand, oh yeah, that's a problem. Like people like die of diarrheal disease, and 1.1 billion people don't have access to it, and like, okay. But like there's actually some real problems, and like what is the key aspect of the problem? And is it that people don't understand what a germ is, and so they don't believe they need clean water? Anyway, it's complicated, and with issues like water, energy, health, education, the problems are multifaceted and they're complex. And engineers are not taught how to find problems or even understand them. I was a mechanical engineering student here, and you get problem sets. That's your education. And so you're asked to find the right material for this structure or to solve this digital processing example. You're not asked like, what problem should we solve? What should you do with your engineering skills? Larry Page, our CEO, said a very similar thing in an interview about 3 weeks ago in Wired, which is it's not easy coming up with moonshots. And we're not teaching people how to identify those difficult projects. I think, and engineers and technologists, we're not good at this. And so this is gonna take everyone in order to identify what should we be making breakthrough technology to solve. But there's another thing I just said. Oh, well, actually this is an example of that. So sort of sidebar, one of the things I do at Google, other than the rapid evaluation, is I run a conference called Solve for X. The conference is, we try and celebrate moonshot thinking. So we get a bunch of people on the stage who can sort of say, here's a crazy idea. I think it's not that crazy, and here's why. But we did a little new thing this year, which was to get people who could really identify problems. And it was really wonderful to have Gina there. Gina is the famous actress, Academy Award winning. She was in A League of Her Own, Thelma and Louise. But recently what she's been doing for the past 5 or 6 years is actually been studying gender equality or inequality in media. And she said that she really started thinking about this when she had children of her own. And she always had a spidey sense that there weren't that many good roles for women in Hollywood, but she didn't really quite understand the problem when we started watching all the family programming. She was like, where are all the women? There's just not women roles in the programs, and they're definitely not in the jobs like chief justices or the head of business or government. So she wanted to look into that problem. And so she created an institute. And what they do is they study gender inequality. And so if you look at this is like on the left, this is industries. So C-suite, investors, editors-in-chief. On the bottom is sort of science stuff, so like computer scientists. And then on the right is like their presence in films. And so you can sort of really quickly scan and see like, wow, males do everything here, and there's very few for females. She started looking into it more, and she realized, for second graders, if you ask them the question, hey, are you interested in science and technology? 70% say, yeah, I'm interested in science and technology. Or I don't know, maybe science and math, I'm not sure. In 10th grade, that number is 60% for boys and 20% for girls. So it's sort of like, what happened? What happened in between those years that could make such a dramatic change? I see this every day, and Google X, which is still, even with all of our efforts to do better diversity, is still majority male. So what I loved about Gina is she didn't just say, hey, here's the problem. She said, here's the problem. I have all the data. Let's utilize it to build a solution that maybe can fix this problem. So for example, she said that maybe someone could use, I can't because I'm not an engineer, but some engineer could. They could use this data so that if I'm watching, let's say, a film on TV, I could see it has some kind of like gender quality score. And then if I'm a parent, I can make a decision about, am I going to use this programming for my young daughter or son or not? And I really like that about Gina. from the perspective of an engineer, someone in Silicon Valley who's making a new application, they're probably, especially if they're male, they're never going to think about this issue. They're never going to make a technology that is trying to solve gender inequality. And so it's really important for people like Gina to have a huge voice and communicate and be heard by the techies of the world who can then go and try and build some of those solutions to those problems. So the other thing I just said, so there's problem finding, and the other thing that is really important is the storytelling aspect. So one more example of that. One thing I'm personally fascinated by, makes me wish I had studied biology more than a summer school class, is synthetic biology. So what this means, it's sort of like normal software. So if you're on a computer and you're writing software, you're basically writing a code which is then transformed in zeros and ones and read by your computer in order to do something. Synthetic biology is very similar. You're coding in the base pairs of DNA, so A, T, Gs, and Cs, and which is then eventually goes into the cell. The cell is the version of the computer, and then it does something. So this is really interesting. So why is that interesting? Well, this is fundamentally this has all happened in the last 5 or 6 years. We can fundamentally now create new DNA sequences that have never existed before in nature, have them go do stuff in living organisms. So there's already been, you can easily make DNA sequences for proteins, now for amoebas, now in like sort of E. coli. Stuff that's any bigger than that is still too expensive. And here's the reason why. So if you look at the price per base pair, this is for, on the blue line, that's reading DNA, so that's sequencing DNA. So it's like if I have some DNA and being able to see what my DNA code is. You can see that that's dropped 6 orders of magnitude in the last 20 years, and it's projected to continue to drop. That's where there's all this like personalized medicine that's becoming a big thing. It's all riding this trend. Similarly, with writing DNA, it's still expensive, but there's reasons to believe it's going to follow the same path. Okay, so what does that mean? It means, to me, there's going to be all these new things starting to be created. People are going to start, high school students even, this is happening now, are writing new DNA sequences that solve problems. Okay, one of my favorite examples is this guy named Sean Douglas. He was a researcher at the Weiss Institute at Harvard, now at UCSF. He makes these things that are basically these DNA cylinders. They come out of a field called DNA origami, which means you create all these DNA strands which self-assemble into a structure. So this particular structure is sort of a hexagonal cylinder that can actuate on one side. He calls them a DNA micro-robot. The point of it is to open, put a payload in, close, and then move around your body. There's a little key, which is this thing, which is about 20 nanometers across. It's a little key that when it matches into a protein, it unlocks and it releases its payload. And like that's super cool and nerdy, and I'm like, oh, that's so amazing. But like, what's like really, really cool about that is that payload can be a chemotherapy drug. And so you can start to do incredibly specific drug treatments. And I don't know if I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with chemotherapy, but right now the standard practice is you just release a bunch of drugs into a patient. It sort of affects all the cells in the body, and then it also happens to affect the tumor cells that you're trying to target. So you have all these side effects. I think we're going to very quickly see that approach seems incredibly barbaric, because you're going to have a targeted delivery of multiple drugs to a very targeted tumor. So that's amazing, and everyone can understand and why that's an amazing application and how that's going to change the world. But this is also, we're creating a new life form here. We're creating like new life. It's like we're almost like playing God. And I fear that what happens sort of to like stem cells could also happen to synthetic biology, where the potential to really do a lot of good in the world could be sort of led off course and to other, and so like funding could be cut, et cetera. So I think there needs to be important storytelling about why this synthetic biology is really important. So I think those two things, storytelling and problem finding, I think there are two examples that Moonshots, these utilizing radical breakthroughs in technology to make the world a better place. It requires everybody, and it requires everyone to come to the table. It's not just going to come from PhDs from MIT, or Google X. It's going to come from Gina Davis. It's going to come from individuals. It's going to come from everybody who in order to make these things happen. So the last thing I wanted to say, and coming back to my sort of earlier discussion about the Bletchley Parks and the Manhattan projects of the world, is sort of why still why don't we see the Bletchley Park of water purification? And I think one of the reasons is it's really hard for pretty much everyone in the world to be very audacious. Whether if you're an academic, let's say, you're writing papers and you're in a silo. It's hard to say if you're a water researcher, hey, I think I've figured out how to get clean water to everybody. If you're a small company, you may maybe say, I don't have the resources. If you're a big company, it's I have shareholders. So there's always reasons why to not take a moonshot, why to not do something really audacious. And so I think it behooves all of us to celebrate any of those approaches that we see. The other challenging thing is as an individual, it's hard to say every day to your friend, man, I think I know how to get internet access to everyone in the world. Or, man, it really bothers me that the sun's been using fusion for 5 billion years, and why can't we do it too? And that type of you're dude, stop being crazy. But we need to celebrate that kind of radical thinking, and we need to celebrate people who are willing to just say that, hey, it might be possible. Let's at least consider it. So anyway, thank you. That's it. That's all I have. I appreciate it.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.